Did you ever have the experience of like say helping Don work on fencing? Like putting up the fence, and he'd say, okay, just hold this for a minute.
Julia has had that experience. They were moving a canoe or something.
Yep.
And he at one end and Julia at the other. And she was quite young at the time. And he said, just a minute, I'll be right back. And she stood there holding the canoe.
For a long time.
I recall that happened quite a bit on the boat too.
Yeah.
Hold this line.
Hold this line.
Yep. And then you realize he'd gone into town to get croissants. Yeah. So you gonna go click, or what are we doing here?
No,
She's already been running.
Okay,
She
well, do
does.
click anyway.
Okay, just for Bosh. Here we go, and
Joe Fichter here with Don and Abby, Crisis Cruises. So I did want to recall with you folks the time that you two and Wilder and I were in the Baltic Sea, northern Germany, and we were sailing motoring Zeepard, and we came into the town and harbor.
Monday.
And yeah, and you were of course at the helm because there were a lot of expensive boats, and I certainly didn't want to be at the helm. But we were halfway into the harbor, halfway down the harbor, and you announced to us that you had no ability to steer, and then we started drifting towards a whole bunch of expensive boats, and it turned out that you knew, but I didn't know, but the propeller had fallen off the boat.
I ran to the back of the boat and I looked down. No propeller.
Well, and you knew exactly where it was.
I looked around and I thought, we may have to try and find it.
And sure enough, that's what we spent quite a few days doing.
No, only two. The hard part was the wind. There was unfortunately not much wind, and we were running very slowly. And there were all these racing boats, fiberglass, facing out, and almost at the end of their line was one very narrow walking dock with two telephone pole-sized posts that brought him to shore, and it sat out about 3 feet from the bows of these boats, one class of boat all the way up to that point. And we were moving, but not fast, but moving, and the wind was behind us. And I realized that if we got blown into them, we'd have an insurance bill that would never go away. And so I yelled at Joe, as I actually ran with you up to the bow, got the heavy mooring line, and said, fleeted one end to the bollard on the bow, the double bollards, and the other end I handed to you.
By the way, I tied a nice bollard then, I'm sure, right?
Bowling.
Bowling, I mean. Bowling, right.
And I said, the wind is going to take us, and as we get to it, you're going to have one shot. You get a loop over it and pull it tight on the second bollard. And while I tried, the rudders were still there and working, but we weighed 40 tons. And here goes. We came in and we hit the end of the dock just about right. You got it over, got the line around the bollard, and you paid it out a little because it was the boat, the weight, the 40 ton of boat. And the dock started like this, And then it started to lean and lean and lean. And we were going to pull the post right out of the mud bottom. And the boat slowed and slowed. And finally we stopped, and the dock sort of came back to perpendicular again. And I got a great job, Joe, and I went below to change my underwear. But the next day, the harbor master was a really nice guy, and he showed up. And we explained we had a little problem. He said, "You can't stay there." I said, "I know we can't, but we can't move either." So he went and got a yard, the harbor master's little tugboat, came alongside and moved us up to a really prime location right opposite his little office. And then the next day he came back with a diver,
Mm-hmm.
professional diver.
But it was a whole crew. I remember there.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah.
whole crew on that little tugboat.
Because people had to provide oxygen for them, and it was
Yeah, but this is deep sea, even though we were not in that deep water.
uh-huh.
And we were going to have to go down on the bottom and walk around and kind of mucky stuff. And I knew I had a square of where I thought the anchor might be. And we went to the upwind side and then drifted down and let this guy walk back and forth and back and forth. We washed his hose. And we got near the end of the square, and I thought, here we go again. I'll have to go back up and drift down again. All of a sudden, he double tugged on the line. He had found it. It had gone down in the mud. It was sticking up, so the flukes were like this in the mud. And we dropped a rope to him, line. And he tied it, and the two guys in the boat didn't maneuver because it was rotating, so it really was dug into the mud. And they yanked and finally with a little bit of power from the boat, the thing broke loose and we were able to pull it up in the boat. Because if we had not found it, we would have been there for a month trying to find another propeller that would go on that shaft.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they actually were going to make one, weren't they?
Yeah, well, we talked about making one, but that would have been $1,000 or more. And the next day, he came with a bigger tug, harbor tug, lashed us alongside, and we came out of Monday up the harbor to Rostock.
Mm-hmm.
And in Rostock there was a boatyard with a travel lift. We were able to lift the Zapard out of the water, pull it ashore, settle it down. And that was scary.
Yeah.
You were a freaking hero. If you had missed that dock, we would have just taken out all these fiberglass sailboats. And that would not have been pretty. It was Scaffa, I'm pretty sure.
Staffa, that was it.
Staffa.
And why were we listening to Grieg?
Because we left the island behind us was where there had been one of the first Christian missionaries on that island, a monastery. And they had a couple of, they made scotch. And we stopped there and bought some scotch, some malt scotch. And we spent a night there.
That was Oban, wasn't it?
Well, it might have been, yeah, it might well have been.
Toblerone? No.
No, that was a great, Toblerone was another Yeah, that was a wonderful harbor.
Yeah, with all the colorful houses.
Yeah. But it could have been all done. And we walked around the island, and the next day we left that island to head out to, oh boy, I wish I knew we were doing this today. There was the island of Moose. What were those islands, Jackie? Do you remember?
I'm trying to.
What?
I'm trying to remember.
Anyway, there were 3 islands just north of there, and we went to those. And were you with us when we went to the outer one? And that we yelled at a fisherman, where could we get dinner? Were you with us?
I'm not sure.
We,
We,
he said, well, there's a little restaurant on the island. And the island was owned by a Philadelphia woman, Strawbridge and Collier, a Strawbridge family heiress. And she married a Scotsman who was really into Celtic music. And they took over an old church, remodeled it, and we're turning it into the National Celtic Library, musical library. But we entered, and these fishermen were just cleaning their nets. They came in, and they said, well, there's a little restaurant here. It's very, very good, lovely food. I said, can you get us reservations for dinner? And he said, well, I'll see what I can do. So he came back, he came out on deck, he called on the radio, yes. And the woman said, yes, we can take care of 5 or 6 of you. And so we said, wonderful, we'll be there at 7 o'clock. But we went ashore for a hike on this island, which was just basically covered with sheep and some goats. And when we went by a farmhouse, this girl came out, and we said, how far can we go? Well, you can go way out, but you're not going to see much. And we asked her about the restaurant. Oh yes, the restaurant is back that way, and my mother cooks there. Oh, that's nice. And the mother came to the door, followed by the guy. It turned out to be the fisherman. He'd set us up with his own wife. But we went to the restaurant that night and ordered dinner. It was a delicious dinner. And the waitress who came out to take the order turned out to be this 14-year-old girl. And we had been kidding her about something. You remember what we were kidding her about, Abby?
No,
no.
unfortunately.
But we were kidding her, and she loved being kidded. And we ordered the whole dinner, including a dessert. And the dessert was something very special that we wanted. And she came out and said she was very sorry, but they were out of it. There was none available that night. And she brought me a piece of, it was like shred on a platter. And I said, no, I'm not sure I want that, but I'm trying to. And then she started to laugh. And went back in the kitchen and brought out the dessert I ordered. And she kind of went, nah, 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 nah. She was a really, really cute girl. And if I'd known we would hit the store, I would have worked on the parts of it.
So she got even with your kidding.
Yeah, she really got even with me.
Well, we got on that boat that summer, but when we got on the boat, you already had some kind of award or something on the in there on the canal, the First and Clyde. What was the name of that the canal that you, or the,
there was a canal from the 18th century to cross from Edinburgh to, what was the city we were at?
Glasgow.
Glasgow. And after at the end of World War II, Great Britain had all these bombed out cities and all the rubble to get rid of. And they didn't think these canals would ever be used again. And they didn't know where to dump all the rubble they were cleaning up from World War II, from the bombing. So they filled in the canal. Well, then they decided that was a big mistake. And they decided to reopen the canal. And it's called the Firth and Clyde Canal.
The Forth and Clyde Canal.
Actually, Firth, I think.
Oh, First, that's right, First and Firth.
Firth and Clyde. And Clyde was a big harbor in Glasgow where they built the Royal Navy ships and the ocean liners. It was the premier shipbuilding city. And it was open, but they never had anything as big as they could go through it. But we measured, even under the mast and lower them, there was a place where we could lower no more. We even allowed the boat to put water in the boat and try to, but at 40 tons, to lower it even an inch to a shipload of weight. But
So you were the first big boat to go through that canal.
We were the biggest boat to go through the canal.
In 100 years or something like that.
But then it was an adventure. Normally it would have taken 2 days. It took us over a week. And we first picked up a bed spring somebody thrown in the canal and got wrapped around the propeller. And a bed spring, you know what it looks like, all these springs.
Right.
And we tried to get it off and there was no way. But the canal authority got hold of some guys that work in the oil rigs in the North Sea who were underwater welders. And they came back with torches and went under and cut the damn thing off. Another time we stopped.
So you had a lot of support from the government to help you along if you got.
Yeah, they said, we'll get you through. So that was a challenge to them. Really nice guys. And we got to one place where overnight somebody came and uncleated the boat. And we were just drifting for hours, fortunately. Nothing happened. And we just drifted into a bank. But there was one town, I can't remember it, before Glasgow, which was Catholic. And very, very anti-Church of England. And a lot of crime, little criminal activity. And I said, the locks were closed. We can't let you go through the Glasgow tonight. So they sent a policeman up in a police car. And the police car, the boat is tied up at the dock from here to there with a police car, with a policeman in it all night long to make sure that the ruffians didn't come down and create havoc, steal, whatever.
So the government really wanted you to be successful and get through because it would prove that would show that other boats of your size could do it.
And 2 days after, actually the day after that, half all night, we got to the town, what was the name of the town where we left the boat, Abby?
I think she's out again.
You out again, Abby?
I think she's fallen asleep.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there was a town there, and there was a harbor, nice harbor, and we ended up leaving the boat there for the winter. We really enjoyed Glasgow. We loved Glasgow. In many ways, we like Glasgow better than Edinburgh. It was just filled with universities and culture. And who was the physicist? The great Scottish physicist who invented more physics and how to teach physics.
I don't know. I thought you were going to ask me who the architect is. And
Well, the architect was
Macintosh.
Rennie Macintosh.
Yes.
And we visited the places he designed, and we visited the school. Oh boy.
Yeah, the Glasgow School of Art,
Yeah,
what that he designed
where he
and taught there,
Yeah.
and designed a lot of the furniture.
And when we got there, we realized that we were looking at Frank Lloyd Wright stuff. And then as time went on, we realized that Rennie Macintosh was 20, 30 years ahead in age of
Of Frank Lloyd
Frank
Wright.
Lloyd Wright. And that many of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs were dead copies of things Macintosh had done years earlier. I'd always liked Frank Lloyd Wright, but he was such an egotistical ass. And he just copied initially in his early years Macintosh's design. And Macintosh's designs were both interior and exterior. And interior, a lot of the interior design, including a very stylish red rose that they incorporated in his work, was done by his wife. And his wife's name, I think, was something Marguerite or Margaret Campbell. And are you there? Are you there?
I'm here.
So Glasgow was a favorite city for Scotland,
It really was.
and
We wintered there, and we did all the spring work there.
let's see, what about?
And we had our car there. We got our car there somehow. And in the spring, we not only did all the spring work on the boat, but we roamed around the city and saw all these fabulous cultural museums and so on.
But also when we asked the children, because you had 3 with you and Laurie, and then Gay and Chuck had 3 at separate times. And separately, without getting together or talking about it, we just asked the kids what was their favorite, one of their favorite cities and or countries, and they both said Scotland, which we thought was interesting because there was a lot of history, and it, of course, was a lovely country and friendly people, and the language was almost right. Sometimes it was hard.
Yeah, very hard to understand
Way
the Scotch.
hard, but they all had very fond memories.
Yeah. Well, yes, there was Glasgow, and then, well, we just talked about on the North Sea, but then there was also a beautiful trip, maybe it was the same trip, but going up the Caledonia Canal,
Right.
going through narrow canals and then opening up to the locks.
And Loch Ness, we were in Loch Ness, and we were looking for the monster.
We never found that monster.
And one day we stopped at one place for the night and tied up to a dock and had tea at a lovely inn looking over Glencoe Mountain. And there was there was a town at the end where they did
Inverness.
well, Inverness is at one end,
Yeah.
but before that, a port something.
Oh, right, Port William, or
Yeah, something.
Is that
like
it?
Port
Yeah.
Arthur, yeah, Port William. And Jackson was picked to be the guy, and they were doing the 7. What is the expression, Abby? 9 yards.
Oh, the whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. And the expression we had all heard of, but we didn't know what it meant. Turned out when the Scots raised an army, the various lords would pay up their soldiers in yards of
fabric.
fabric, woolen fabric, and it was their tartans. And the way they treated their troops sometimes, they were supposed to give them 9, at the end of a month or something, they were 9 yards of material.
And that was because that was the right amount. If they had to make camp somewhere or just, they had that was their blanket and their covering and everything else.
Their
So
raincoat.
The right amount to cover their body, but also to have something extra to sleep on, right?
yeah.
And a lot of these guys cheated, and only gave them 7 or 8. And most of their troops were not educated enough to know how to measure it. So the expression, this lord or that lord, gave you the whole 9 yards.
Uh-huh.
And Jackson was the guy who stood up, and they wrapped him in 9 yards, and then they showed what would happen if he only got 7 or 8 yards. That you wouldn't be able to defend yourself or your body from the rain and the wind and all these things without the whole 9 yards. But Scotland was, there was a town, Podford, where
What was the town?
I think was it Podford, Abbey?
Potsdam?
No. Podford, I think. Anywhere, somewhere where we met Ross and Jean.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And it was a town that after centuries, nobody really knew who owned what piece of land here or there. So all the cattle, sheep, pig, everything roamed free. So everybody, they knew which cows were theirs and which sheep were theirs. But there was shit everywhere. And if you were driving, which we weren't, but if you were walking, they'd come up to you. And within a year or two of when we were there, they finally passed laws requiring them to fence in their property and fence in their animals. And they weren't walking between cow pies down the road. And the animals.
Aside from that, it was a very pretty little town.
We also had one of the wildest storms that night. And it was blowing like hell. We were at anchor. And the anchor began to drag. So I pulled it up and I put the nose virtually right in on the beach, dropped the anchor and backed off so the goddamn anchor line was like this. And but we were still dragging, and we were passing a mooring, and we pulled it, got hold of it, and pulled in it, and it was a big one. And we were able to have pull ourselves over so we were between two sets. That was one of the few nights that was so bad that I spent the night in the store worried that the wind was howling, the rain was falling.
You had one of those nights, Joe, you and the...
Well, yes, I was just gonna say, speaking
Different
of dropping anchor and
Dragging.
dragging and crises, there was that time, I don't think this was Scotland, or maybe it was, but somewhere where we ended up, we dropped anchor, but then we were dragged so far that we ended up in the middle of a big shipping channel,
Yeah.
and we were up all night making sure some big ship wouldn't ram into us.
Was that in England?
I'm not sure where that was. Do you remember?
I don't think that was
No, that
Scotland.
was still Steve Spencer with us in the England one.
I feel like it might have been the Netherlands.
No,
No,
No.
because that
no, it
wouldn't.
wasn't.
Well, we didn't have many of those, but we had a few.
Yes.
And but we survived all of them. But Scotland was just a magical place. And they had a parade, they had some big, huge anniversary of Edinburgh. And they had boats there from all the European countries and sailing ships. And we were the only boat around with an American flag. So they asked us to be in the parade and open up, not let people below, but let people come and see the boat and try. So the Scots were very, very wonderful people to be with. And that's one of the really favorite parts of our years on Zapad.
Well, I think we fooled a lot of people with our flag too, because it wasn't a straight up American flag; it was the colonial flag.
And we flew the 13-star American flag. And in those days, the EU was just formed, and there were 13 states to the EU, as well as originally 13 states in America. So we explained to them that we're trying to get America into the EU, and they thought that was hysterical, and how stupid could we be? But
Maybe not so stupid now.
Scotland was Tracy and Carl went 2 weeks ahead of us to hike. But when you're hiking in Scotland in the spring, they have they're not fruit flies. They're, what do they call them?
Midges.
Midges. They're like fruit flies, and they swarm you.
But we
And-
didn't have...
And the rain came. And in preparation in England, I spent $100 on every kind of anti-midgey thing you can think of. And when we got to Scotland, we never used it. Turns out that the midges don't like salt water. And
They also don't like sunshine. They only
Yeah.
like wet, rainy.
rain and fog. And so when we sold the boat, we threw away about all of that $100 worth of stuff we bought in Scotland. The company in Ireland and the company in England had the same names, but different ownerships, and were operating under different rules. And they were having a fight.
And they were fighting.
They got into a fight and they just shut off our service. So Abby was up near London with friends of ours, with
No.
yeah,
Well, I spent one night with Sylvie.
with Sylvie, but then you had, was it Annie with you?
Yeah. Annie was to meet her family and fly home. And she had to just fly home from England. And I guess they were on the same plane. So they met at the airport. But this was days later. Annie and I did everything we could think of in this little country town of, can't remember the name.
Well, the harbor master finally arranged for us through the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, the Irish Coast Guard, called the British Coast Guard, and let me pass us through between their networks. And I was finally able to call Abby because they realized that we were in a ridiculous situation.
You'd be stuck there forever.
Well, we couldn't contact each other.
So we didn't know where to meet.
Well, also, Wilder and I were with you, but eventually
That's right.
you said, look, this is crazy. We're going to be here for a long time. And you bought us a bus ticket, and we took off for another spot in Ireland.
And on the West Coast. The original airport, the first transatlantic flights after World War II all landed at Shannon. And then they went on to London or other places in Europe. So we got you to Shannon. We were able to get you on a plane home. Well, you and I alone finally were able to cross from the southeast coast, the corner of Ireland. Table Moori,
Yeah.
a lovely little town, and we sailed across to Falmouth, England.
Just the two of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was really nervous because the weather was still bad, but it had gotten enough better that Don said we better go. We got to get over there. We were meeting other friends in England. And so the two of us went, but the weather was okay. But I was worried because it was quite a long.
Well, they call it Land's End, that southwest corner of England. And we were finally able to get out around it and sailed into Plymouth, I think. No, Falmouth, England.
And then we went to Dartmouth.
Yeah, we went to Dartmouth, England on the way back to London. It was a fabulous adventure. Let's face it. I think back in those years, we did so many things that that boat never should have done. But it did it, and it was fine, and people couldn't believe it.
Well, we ran into the man that had sold it to us, who had become a friend, and we ran into him later.
He was a broker, he didn't own it.
And he said to us, he said, if I had had any idea what you were going to do with that boat, I never would have sold it to you. So I'm glad he didn't know.